The city was a canyon, and I was the river flowing through it. Not a gentle, meandering one, but a flash flood of sweat, steel, and adrenaline. My fixed-gear bike, a stripped-down frame with no brakes, was an extension of my own nervous system. We moved as one entity through the concrete and glass chasm of the Chicago Loop. Yellow cabs swerved like startled cattle. Pedestrians were a tide to be navigated, and the roar of the L train overhead was the city's constant guttural heartbeat. My name is Leo Holloway, and my world was a 3.5-inch screen on my handlebars, a map crisscrossed with deadlines, and the relentless ticking of a clock I could never beat, only race to a draw. The ping from the app was just another job. Pick up at a jeweler on Wabash, drop off at the Argosy Tower. The pay was good, a premium rush delivery, which meant some rich guy needed his new toy immediately. Fine by me. The more they paid, the faster I pedaled. Weaving through the afternoon gridlock, I cut a hard left onto Adams Street, and the Argosy shot into view. It was a fossil pressed between two titans of shimmering glass and steel. Built in the 30s, its dark brick and terracotta facade rose in tiered setbacks, a monument to an era of ambition and elegance that felt alien in the modern city. It was the kind of building that had a name, not just a number. I locked my bike to a street sign, the frame hot to the touch, and pushed through the heavy revolving brass doors. The contrast was jarring. The street noise vanished, replaced by a tomb-like silence. The lobby was a cavern of polished marble and gilded Art Deco fixtures that gleamed under soft, warm light. The air was still and cool, tasting of floor polish and old paper. A uniformed elevator operator, a man so ancient he looked like he might have been installed with the original wiring, gave me a slow, disinterested nod from his station beside an ornate, manually operated lift. His name tag read Alvin. "Penthouse," I said, holding up the package, a small, heavy box wrapped in plain brown paper. Alvin grunted and pulled a heavy brass lever. The cage door slid shut with a satisfying clank, and the elevator began its ascent with a low hum and a gentle shudder. It was like rising through time. The penthouse doors were massive, carved from dark mahogany. A man in a crisp security uniform opened one before I could knock. He was built like a refrigerator and had a small white scar bisecting his left eyebrow. He checked my ID against his tablet, then gestured me inside. "Mr. Abernathy is expecting you." I stepped into a space that felt less like an apartment and more like a museum's storage room. Every surface was cluttered with artifacts. African masks stared from the walls with hollow eyes. Celestial charts showing unfamiliar constellations were pinned over bookcases, and glass cases held everything from ancient astrolabes to what looked like fossilized insects trapped in amber. The air hummed with a low electric tension and carried a faint, sharp scent that pricked the back of my throat. It smelled like the air after a lightning strike. Dust motes danced in the shafts of light pouring through the massive arched windows that overlooked the city. In the center of it all, a frail, elderly man in a quilted silk robe stood examining a book bound in what looked like cracking human skin. This had to be Mr. Abernathy. He had a wispy halo of white hair and eyes that were a startlingly bright, intelligent blue. "Ah, the courier," he said, his voice a dry rustle. "Excellent. Punctuality is a virtue lost on the modern world." I placed the box on a table already crowded with star charts. "Just need a signature, sir." He scribbled a spidery signature on my phone screen with a stylus. As I turned to leave, he said, "Wait." He picked up the box I'd just delivered and opened it with trembling fingers. Inside, nestled on a bed of black velvet, was a heavy bronze watch. It was beautiful and strange. The face had no numbers, only 3 stylized etched symbols: a wolf, a falcon, and a rat. Just then, the mahogany doors to the penthouse burst inward, splintering from their frame with a sound like a cannon shot. 3 figures flowed into the room. They wore immaculate dark suits, the kind you see on bankers and lawyers. But that's where the normality ended. Their faces, they weren't there. They were blurs, smudges of motion sickness on reality, like a corrupted video file. Light seemed to bend and die around their heads, absorbed into a featureless void. They moved without a sound, impossibly fast, their limbs stretching and contracting in ways that were fundamentally wrong. The refrigerator-sized security guard went for his gun. He never cleared the holster. One of the blurs crossed the 20-foot room in a single fluid motion. There was a wet, tearing sound, and the guard crumpled to the marble floor, a broken puppet. The second guard, who had been standing by the window, met a similar fate before he could even scream. It was over in seconds. A slaughter performed with the detached efficiency of a machine. The shadows, what else could I call them, turned their non-faces toward Mr. Abernathy. The old man didn't flinch. He just looked at me with an expression of profound, soul-crushing regret. "Fools," he whispered, more to them than to me. "You're too late." He grabbed my arm. His grip was shockingly strong, his bony fingers digging into my flesh like talons. He shoved the bronze watch into my hand. It was heavy and cold as a stone from a riverbed. "The cycle. Don't let them complete it," he rasped, his bright blue eyes wide with a terrifying urgency. A dark stain was spreading across the front of his silk robe. One of the shadows had moved, a flicker of motion I barely registered, and now a thin, dark blade protruded from Abernathy's chest. My training, the thousands of hours I'd spent reacting to the city's chaos, took over. I didn't think. I just moved. I wrenched my arm free from the dying man's grip, my fingers closing around the watch. I bolted. One of the shadows swiped at me as I passed, its arm extending like black taffy. I felt a searing cold rake across my back, tearing through my jacket and shirt. Adrenaline erased the pain. I didn't take the elevator. I hit the emergency stairwell door so hard the metal frame buckled. I flew down the concrete stairs, taking them 3 and 4 at a time, my feet barely touching the steps. The stairwell was a blur of gray walls and numbered doors. I could hear nothing behind me, which was somehow more terrifying than any footstep. I burst out into the lobby, scattering a pair of startled tourists. Alvin, the elevator operator, just stared, his mouth a perfect O of shock. I didn't slow down. I hit the revolving door and spilled onto the street, the sudden cacophony of the city a welcome shock. My bike was where I left it. My hands fumbled with the lock, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I clicked it open, threw my leg over the frame and pushed off, stomping on the pedals. I risked a glance back. 2 of the blurry figures were exiting the Argosy Tower. They didn't run. They just glided onto the sidewalk, turning their awful, featureless faces in my direction. And then they were after me. I plunged into traffic, a human missile. I blew through a red light, the horn of a delivery truck blaring in my ears. I cut down a narrow alley filled with dumpsters and kitchen steam, bunny-hopped a curb and shot across a plaza, scattering pigeons and office workers. They were still behind me. I could feel their presence, a cold spot in the air, a pressure on the back of my neck. I pedaled harder than I ever had in my life, my lungs burning, my legs screaming. I used every trick I knew. every shortcut, every hidden path. I rode through the lower level of Whacker Drive, a dark, echoing tunnel that amplified the frantic rasp of my own breathing. When I emerged back into the daylight, they were gone. I didn't stop until I reached my shoebox apartment in Wicker Park. I slammed the door, threw 3 deadbolts, and collapsed against it, sliding to the floor. My body trembled uncontrollably. My back was on fire. I peeled off my ruined shirt. 3 long, parallel cuts wept blood, the skin around them pale and puckered as if from frostbite. My hand was still clenched shut. I forced my fingers open. The bronze watch lay in my palm. The 3 animals, wolf, falcon, rat, stared up at me from the face. The hands weren't moving. The watch was dead. But as I sat there on my dirty floor, panting in the sudden silence of my apartment, I had the undeniable, chilling certainty that somewhere out there in the city, something was watching me, and it was waiting. The next 48 hours were a masterclass in paranoia. I tried to pretend it was just a robbery gone sideways, a hallucination brought on by a freak adrenaline surge. But the lie was thin and tore easily. The city I knew, my city, had been corrupted. Every man in a dark suit was a potential threat. Every flicker of movement in my peripheral vision was one of them. I'd catch a glimpse of a blurry figure in the reflection of a storefront window and my heart would seize, only to turn and find nothing there. The shadows under the L tracks seemed deeper, darker, longer than they should. They seemed to cling and stretch as I rode past. I quit my job. I couldn't do it anymore. I couldn't be out there, exposed, a moving target. I stayed in my apartment, subsisting on stale crackers and tap water, the blinds drawn tight. Sleep offered no escape. I'd dream of featureless faces and silent, impossible speed, waking up in a cold sweat with the ghost of Abernathy's final words echoing in my head. The cycle. On the 3rd night they came. There was no knock, no sound of a lock being picked. The first sign was the way the ambient noise of the building changed. The hum of my refrigerator warped, dropping in pitch to a low guttural thrum. The faint sound of my upstairs neighbor's television dissolved into static. The sliver of light under my front door didn't vanish. It was devoured. A thick, inky blackness began to seep in. Not a shadow, but the absence of light itself. It flowed like viscous oil pooling on my floor. My blood ran cold. I scrambled backward, knocking over a stack of bike magazines. The pool of darkness on the floor coalesced, rising, stretching, taking on a vaguely humanoid shape. A second patch of blackness was sliding down the wall from the ventilation grate near the ceiling. A third was oozing through the window frame, defying glass and caulk. 3 of them. They were in my apartment, my last sanctuary. Panic, sharp and absolute, gave me legs. I launched myself at the fire escape window, fumbling with the rusted latch. It finally gave with a screech of protest. I scrambled out onto the narrow metal platform, the cold night air a shock to my lungs. My apartment building was a classic Chicago 3-flat, and the fire escape zigzagged down the brick facade. Below me, the alley was a pit of darkness. I couldn't go down. They'd be on me before I hit the ground. So I went up. My bare feet slapped against the cold iron steps as I climbed toward the roof. The wind was sharp up here, whipping around the corners of the building, carrying the distant wail of a siren. I hauled myself over the parapet onto the flat, tar-papered roof, and stopped. It was a dead end. On one side, a 20-foot drop to the neighboring roof. On the others, a 5-story plunge to the street or the alley. And behind me, rising over the edge of the roof, were the 3 smudged silhouettes. They didn't climb. They flowed up the brick wall like smoke. They advanced on me, silent and inexorable, their presence sucking the warmth from the air. I was trapped. A cornered animal. My hand, acting on its own, went to my pocket and closed around the cold, heavy bronze of the watch. Abernathy's dying gift. My curse. I pulled it out. Its face seemed to absorb the faint city light. Wolf. Falcon. Rat. It was insane. It was impossible. But I was about to be erased from existence by 3 living glitches in reality. What did I have to lose? With a trembling thumb, I pressed the winding crown. It clicked down with a solid, mechanical finality. My fingers found the ridged bezel, the metal cool against my skin. I twisted it. The bezel moved with a series of soft clicks, passing the falcon, then the rat, until the small arrow at the top aligned with the symbol of the wolf. For a second, nothing happened. Then, the pain hit. It was a supernova in my own body. A fire ignited in my marrow, a biological revolt. I heard a sound like a tree branch snapping and realized with a detached horror that it was my own femur. My skeleton was breaking apart, rearranging itself. My muscles tore and writhed, stretching and bunching in new, unnatural configurations. I screamed, a raw, ragged sound that was stolen by the wind. I collapsed onto the gritty tar, my body convulsing. My spine elongated with a series of sickening cracks. Coarse gray fur sprouted from my skin, pushing through my clothes. My jaw cracked and reshaped, my teeth elongating into fangs. The world dissolved into a kaleidoscope of agony and sensory overload. When the pain receded, the world that came back into focus was utterly alien. The drab colors of the city rooftop had been replaced by a million shades of gray, but everything was rendered in exquisite, hyper-sharp detail. My hearing exploded. I could hear a rat scurrying inside the wall of the building across the street, the frantic beat of a pigeon's heart as it slept under an eave 2 blocks away, and the smells. Oh God, the smells. The tar of the roof, the exhaust from the street below, the lingering scent of fear from a cat that had been here hours ago, and the cold, sterile, nothing scent of the creatures before me. My own scent was a mix of sweat, terror, and something else. Something wild. Musk. Predator. I was on 4 paws. I looked down and saw powerful gray-furred legs ending in black claws. I was a wolf. A huge gray wolf standing on a Chicago rooftop. And the shadows looked different now. Through these new eyes, I saw them for what they were. They weren't just blurry men. They were holes in the fabric of the world, chaotic tangles of non-Euclidean geometry and shimmering darkness. They were utterly alien, an affront to nature. But I could also see something else. Inside the roiling chaos of each form, there was a point of focus, a small, dense core that glowed with a faint, cold blue light, a heart, a weakness. One of them lunged. The instinct that now coursed through my veins was not human. It wasn't born of thought or reason. It was ancient, primal, and absolute duck, dodge, strike. I dropped low, the creature's shadowy limb passing over my head with a sound like tearing silk. I sprang forward, my powerful new muscles coiling and releasing. I wasn't Leo Holloway, the scared courier anymore. I was a hunter. I slammed into the creature's midsection, my jaws clamping down on the place where its cold heart glowed. There was no flesh to tear, no blood. It was like biting into packed snow and static electricity. My fangs sank into something that felt both solid and ethereal, and I bit down with all my strength. The thing shrieked. It wasn't a sound heard with ears, but a psychic scream of agony that clawed at the inside of my skull. The blue light in its core flared violently, then shattered. The creature's form destabilized, imploding with a low hiss and dissolved into a shower of fine black dust that was instantly scattered by the wind. The remaining two shadows recoiled. I could feel their surprise, fear. They hesitated, their blurry forms wavering. They had been the hunters. Now, for the first time, they were the prey. They exchanged a silent communication, then simply melted back over the edge of the roof, flowing down the wall and disappearing into the alley's darkness. They were gone. The primal rage and adrenaline began to ebb, replaced by a bone-deep exhaustion. A wave of vertigo washed over me. The world began to spin, the wolf's senses fading. Another spasm of pain, mercifully shorter this time, racked my body. When it was over, I was myself again. I was Leo, naked, bruised, and shivering uncontrollably on the freezing rooftop. The taste of ozone and dust filled my mouth. I crawled to the edge and threw up. Below, I heard the rumble and click-clack of the late-night L train approaching on the elevated tracks that ran past my building. I had survived. My old life, however, was as dead and scattered as the black dust of the creature I had just destroyed. The journey back into my apartment was a pathetic ordeal. I stumbled down the fire escape, my body a symphony of aches and deep muscle bruises. Every joint felt like it had been pulled apart and jammed back together wrong. The door to my unit hung open, a dark, silent mouth. Inside was chaos. They had been thorough. My mattress was slashed open, bookshelf overturned, clothes and belongings strewn across the floor. They had been looking for something. The watch, or maybe me. I sank onto the floor amidst the wreckage of my life. Hiding was no longer an option. Running was pointless. They could seep through walls. My only path forward was through the mystery that had been thrust into my hand by a dying old man. I had to understand. A thought sparked in the fog of my exhaustion. The delivery. The box Abernathy had opened just before they came. I had brought him the watch, but I had left the empty box and its packaging on his table. It was long gone. But what about the box I had picked up from the jeweler? The premium rush delivery. I had tossed the empty cardboard mailer into my overflowing recycling bin in the kitchen. I rummaged through the pile of junk mail and empty food containers, my heart starting to beat a little faster. I found it. A simple brown cardboard box. It felt too heavy to be empty. I ran my fingers along the inside. Underneath the main flap, my fingers caught on a slight ridge. A false bottom. I tore it open. Tucked inside was a small, leather-bound journal. It was old, the dark brown leather cracked and worn smooth at the corners. There was no title on the cover. I opened it. The pages were filled with a spidery, elegant script. But it was a language I didn't recognize. The text was interspersed with complex astronomical charts, diagrams of constellations I'd never seen, and strange, interlocking symbols that looked alchemical. It was a cipher. I spent the next day and a half poring over the journal, fueled by caffeine and a growing sense of dread. Most of it was incomprehensible, a madman's scrawl, but some words, written in plain English, were sprinkled throughout the text like islands in a sea of code. I saw the Penumbra Society, the Dissolution, and the Guardian. And on one page, next to a detailed sketch of the watch, were the words, "The bestiary key, the watch." It wasn't just a weapon. Abernathy's journal called it a key. A key that unlocked what exactly? I had unlocked the wolf. But what about the others? The falcon and the rat? I had to know. I had to understand the tools at my disposal if I was going to survive. Locking my deadbolts and wedging a chair under the doorknob, I sat on the floor of my wrecked living room. My hands were shaking, not just from fear, but from a strange, terrifying anticipation. I took a deep breath, pressed the crown, and turned the bezel to the symbol of the rat. The transformation was nothing like the wolf's. There was no surge of power, only a sickening, compacting sensation. My bones didn't just break. They felt like they were dissolving, turning rubbery as my body collapsed in on itself. My perspective plummeted. The room swelled to gargantuan proportions. The leg of my overturned coffee table was now a thick wooden pillar. A dust bunny in the corner was the size of a cat. It was nauseating, disorienting. My vision was blurry and wide. My sense of smell a chaotic, overwhelming assault. I could smell the stale beer on the floorboards, the mold in the walls, the individual scent of every neighbor in my building all at once. It was a sensory hell. Panic set in. I was small, weak, and vulnerable. My first instinct was to hide. I scurried under the bookshelf, my new body moving with a twitchy, nervous energy. From this new vantage point, I saw the world from the cracks. I could see the sliver of space under my front door, the gap where the heating pipe entered the wall. This form wasn't for fighting, it was for disappearing. An idea formed, a fragment of human logic in a maelstrom of animal instinct. I scurried to the ventilation grate in the wall. The metal slats were a wide-open door. I slipped through, into the dark, dusty world within the building's walls. The air here was thick with the smells of insulation, rust, and the ghosts of 1,000 cooked meals. I could hear everything. The muffled arguments, the blare of televisions, the rhythmic creak of a bed in the apartment below. The potential was staggering. This form was for espionage, for infiltration, for knowing things I wasn't supposed to know. The rat wasn't a predator, but it was the ultimate survivor. After a few terrifying, informative minutes, I forced myself back into my apartment and willed the transformation to reverse. I returned to my human form with a wet, squelching sound, feeling greasy and unclean. The wolf form had felt noble, powerful. The rat felt debased. But it was a tool, and I needed every tool I could get. I turned my attention back to the journal. The cipher was still the main obstacle. But as I flipped through the pages again, my mind sharpened by the ordeal, I noticed one symbol that appeared more frequently than others. It was a complex geometric shape, like two interlocking crescents pierced by a vertical line. It looked vaguely familiar, but I couldn't place it. I spent hours on my laptop, sketching the symbol in a paint program and running image searches. I sifted through endless pages of occult symbols, corporate logos, and ancient religious iconography. Nothing. Frustrated, I started trying broader search terms. Chicago occult history, secret societies, Chicago, 1893, alchemical symbols architecture. And then I found it. It was in a scanned article from a university journal, an academic paper titled Shadows of the White City, Esoteric Cults and the 1893 World's Columbian Exposition. The symbol was there, clear as day. The author of the article, a graduate student at the University of Chicago, theorized it was the mark of a fringe doomsday cult that believed the exposition was an anchor for otherworldly entities. The author's name was Sarah Jenkins. A surge of hope, the first I'd felt in days, washed over me. This was it. This was my first real lead. The journal was the lock. My transformations were the key, but Sarah Jenkins, she might be the one who could read the instructions. I couldn't do this alone. I needed an expert, a translator. I had to find her. The University of Chicago was another world. As I walked onto the main quad, the frantic energy of the city fell away, replaced by a hushed academic reverence. The campus was a forest of Gothic architecture. Buildings of gray limestone reached for the sky like skeletal fingers, their walls adorned with leering gargoyles and intricate stone carvings. It felt less like a place of modern learning and more like a medieval monastery where forbidden knowledge might be kept under lock and key. Surrounded by bright-eyed students with backpacks and carefree laughter, I felt like a ghost, a grimy, paranoid intruder from the real world. According to the university's online directory, Sarah Jenkins's office was in the Regenstein Library, a brutalist concrete fortress that looked jarringly out of place among the Gothic spires. The interior was a labyrinth of books. The air smelled of aging paper and floor wax. I found her in a carrel deep in the stacks, surrounded by teetering piles of books with titles like Compendium of Alchemical Symbology and Forgotten Histories of the Midwest. She had dark, messy hair pulled back in a haphazard bun, and intense, intelligent eyes magnified by thick-framed glasses. She was so focused on the text in front of her that she didn't notice me until I cleared my throat. She looked up, startled. "Can I help you?" Her tone was wary, the automatic defense of someone used to being interrupted. "Are you Sarah Jenkins?" I asked, my voice sounding rough. "I am." She eyed my frayed jacket and the dark circles under my eyes. "Do I know you?" This was the hard part. I couldn't exactly tell her I was a former bike messenger who could turn into a wolf and was being hunted by faceless shadow monsters. "My name is Leo. I read your article on the esoteric cults of the World's Fair." I pulled out my phone and showed her a picture I'd taken of the recurring symbol from Abernathy's journal. "I need to know what this means." She leaned closer. Her professional curiosity piqued. Her skepticism was a tangible thing, a shield she held up against the world. "Where did you get this? This is from a private collection. It shouldn't be public." "A man gave it to me. He's dead now," I said, the words flat and cold. "He was murdered by people connected to this symbol." That got her attention. The shield of academic detachment wavered. She studied my face, her sharp eyes searching for any sign that I was crazy or lying. I guess she didn't find one. "My office," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Now." Her office was a cramped, windowless cube in the library's basement. But it was her kingdom. Every inch of wall space was covered in corkboards, pinned with maps of 19th century Chicago, genealogical charts, and photocopied pages of obscure texts. It was the organized chaos of a brilliant, obsessed mind. She shut the door, and the silence felt heavy. "Start talking," she commanded. I told her a heavily edited version of the truth. I told her about the delivery to a reclusive collector named Abernathy, about the violent attack by men whose faces I couldn't see, and about the journal they seemed to be after. I left out the watch and the transformations. Even to my own ears, it sounded insane. But I slid the leather-bound journal across her desk. That, at least, was real. Her eyes widened as she opened it. She ran a reverent finger over the strange script. "This is incredible," she breathed. "This is a variation of Enochian, the so-called angelic language, mixed with alchemical shorthand. I've only ever seen fragments of it." For the next few hours, she became a different person. The wary grad student vanished, replaced by a passionate, laser-focused scholar. She cross-referenced the journal with her own books and notes, muttering to herself, her pen flying across a legal pad. A terrifying picture began to emerge from the coded pages. "They call themselves the Penumbra Society," she said, looking up at me, her face pale. "They're the descendants of the cult I wrote about. They believe our reality is just one layer of many, and that a neighboring reality, one they call the stillness or the shadow, is the true, eternal state of existence." She pointed to a diagram in the journal. It showed two overlapping circles, with lines of energy flowing from one to the other. Abernathy was a former member, a guardian who broke away. He was protecting something they need. This journal, it's a playbook. They're planning a ritual. They call it the dissolution. It's designed to weaken the barrier between the worlds, to essentially overwrite our reality with theirs. Her voice trembled slightly. To let their patrons, the things that live in the shadow, come through. A cold dread, heavier than anything I had felt before, settled in my stomach. This was bigger than a murder. Bigger than me. As she spoke, a prickle of instinct ran up my spine. The same feeling I got on the bike just before a car door swung open in my path. I glanced up from the desk, through the small glass window in her office door. Out in the basement hallway, a man in an expensive-looking gray suit was walking by. He wasn't looking at us directly, but I saw his head turn slightly as he passed. For a fraction of a second, his features seemed to waver, to blur at the edges, like heat haze off asphalt. My blood turned to ice. "We have to go," I said, my voice a harsh whisper. I stood up so fast my chair screeched against the floor. "What? What are you talking about?" Sarah asked, confused. "Now!" I grabbed the journal off her desk and stuffed it into my jacket. I pulled her by the arm, yanking her out of her chair. "There's another way out of here?" "The service tunnels. But Leo, what's going on?" Her fear was turning to panic. "They found us." I didn't need to say anything more. I dragged her toward a heavy metal door at the end of the hall marked "Maintenance Only." As I threw it open, revealing a dark, dusty tunnel, I glanced back. The man in the suit was standing at the other end of the corridor, his featureless face turned directly toward us. He started to move, not walking, but gliding, closing the distance with an unnatural speed. We plunged into the darkness of the service tunnel, the heavy door slamming shut behind us. Sarah was breathing in ragged gasps, a mix of fear and exertion. The cold, hard truth had just crashed into her academic world. Her theories were no longer confined to the pages of old books. They were real. They were hunting us. And now, whether she liked it or not, she was a part of it. We ended up at Sarah's apartment, a cozy, book-filled space in a pre-war building in Hyde Park, not far from the university. It was her sanctuary, and we had just violated it, bringing the shadows to her doorstep. She paced back and forth in her living room, running her hands through her hair, while I stood watch at the window, peering through the blinds at the street below. "They know who I am. They know where I work. Oh God, they probably know where I live," she said, her voice tight with panic. "This is insane. This can't be happening." "It is happening," I said, my tone harsher than I intended. "Panicking won't help. We need to figure out our next move." She stopped pacing and looked at me, her fear slowly being replaced by a steely resolve. The scholar in her was taking over, seeking order in the chaos. You're right. She took a deep breath. "That journal is our only advantage. We need to know everything in it. And you're holding something back. I can see it. What aren't you telling me?" I hesitated, but she was right. We were in this together now. She was my brain. I was her. Well, I wasn't sure what I was. I sat her down and told her everything. About the watch, the bestiary key, about the transformations, the wolf, the rat. I expected her to recoil, to call me a monster. Instead, her eyes widened with a look of stunned academic fascination. A mutable artifact? A somatic key? It's a classic archetype, but to see it? To think it's real? She looked at the watch, which I'd placed on her coffee table, as if it were the Rosetta Stone. We need to understand its limits. For the next day, her apartment became our command center. With Sarah translating, the journal began to give up its secrets. We learned the rules. The key drew on the user's own life force. Each transformation was a massive expenditure of energy, leaving the Guardian, as the journal called the wielder, drained and weak. Staying in a bestial form for too long was dangerous. The animal instincts could begin to overwrite the human consciousness, a process the journal called the feral erosion. Lose yourself completely, and there was no coming back. It was a weapon with a terrible cost. "We need to know what you're capable of," Sarah said, her voice all business. "We need to test the third form." That night we went to the roof of her building. The city spread out below us, a glittering web of light under a starless, hazy sky. Lake Michigan was a vast sheet of darkness to the east. I was nervous. The rat had been vile, the wolf agonizing. What would this be? I took a breath, pressed the crown, and turned the bezel to the falcon. This time it wasn't pain. It was an explosion of lightness, of release. My body felt like it was dissolving, not compacting or breaking, but unraveling into pure energy. My bones became hollow, my vision sharpened to an impossible degree, and then the wind caught me. I had wings. The feeling was indescribable. It was pure, absolute freedom. I banked on an updraft, soaring high above the Hyde Park rooftops. The city wasn't a canyon anymore. It was a map, a living circuit board. The cars below were metallic beetles, the people tiny ants. I could see the shimmering towers of downtown, the dark expanse of the lake, the endless grid of streets stretching out to the horizon. My falcon eyes could pick out a discarded newspaper on a park bench from 500 feet up. It was intoxicating. This was the ultimate reconnaissance tool. Over the next few nights, I became a phantom in the Chicago sky. Guided by Sarah, who was frantically cross-referencing names and locations from the journal with online databases, I flew patrols. We were no longer just running, we were hunting back. The journal mentions a meeting place, she'd tell me through a small earpiece. An old private club, the Olympian Club, top of the Hancock Center. And I would fly. A peregrine falcon, diving through the skyscrapers of the Magnificent Mile, a predator in a place no one would ever think to look. I'd perch on antennas and window ledges, a feathered gargoyle watching the city's elite. From my vantage point 1,000 feet in the air, I saw them. Men and women in expensive clothes, stepping out of black cars, their faces normal and human. But there was a coldness to them, a stillness in their eyes. They gathered in a penthouse club, its windows offering a panoramic view of the city they intended to devour. And that's when I saw him. He was standing in the center of the room, holding a glass of champagne, surrounded by acolytes. He was handsome, charismatic, with a smile that could charm a snake. And I recognized him instantly. His face was plastered on billboards, on the sides of buses, on TV charity drives. Julian Davenport. Real estate mogul, philanthropist, the golden boy of Chicago's high society. He was the head of the Serpent, the leader of the Penumbra Society. I relayed the information to Sarah. The shock in her voice was palpable, even through the crackle of the earpiece. Davenport? That's impossible. He's on the board of the university. He funds half the museums in this city. The realization hit us both with the force of a physical blow. This wasn't some back alley cult of hooded fanatics. This was the establishment. The rich, the powerful, the people who ran the city. They weren't hiding in the shadows. They were hiding in plain sight. Their darkness concealed behind a veneer of wealth and respectability. Back in the apartment, the scale of the conspiracy began to solidify. Sarah, her fingers flying across her keyboard, started digging into Davenport's corporate holdings, his charitable foundation. A pattern emerged. "Look at this," she said, pointing to a map on her screen. Red dots were scattered across the Chicagoland area. These are all properties his foundation has purchased in the last 5 years. Abandoned factories, old subway substations, forgotten water reclamation plants. They seem random, but when you overlay them with a geomagnetic survey map, she clicked a button. A new layer of data appeared on the map. Every single property Davenport had acquired was located on a site of unusual geomagnetic activity, a natural weak point in the Earth's energy field. "They're not just planning one ritual," Sarah whispered, her face illuminated by the glow of the screen. "They're building a network, using the whole city as a giant focusing array. They've been planning this for over a century. We were no longer just fighting a handful of shadow creatures. We were fighting the secret heart of Chicago itself, and it wanted to sacrifice its city and everyone in it to the cold, silent darkness that waited on the other side. The city's elite have long arms. The pushback was swift and subtle, a series of velvet-gloved punches designed to isolate and discredit. Sarah got the first hit. A terse email from her department head summoned her to a meeting. Her doctoral advisor, a man who had championed her work, now looked at her with cold disappointment. Her research was deemed unorthodox, bordering on conspiratorial. Her access to the university's special collections archive was suspended, effective immediately. They were cutting her off from her sources, her weapons. The second hit came that night. We were in Sarah's apartment, poring over a 19th century city planning map, when we heard a faint scratching at the front door. Not the sound of a key, but of metal on metal. Someone was picking the lock. "Get back," I hissed, pushing Sarah toward the bedroom. The scratching stopped. A moment of silence, then the lock clicked open. Before the door could even swing inward, I made my move. No time for the wolf. I activated the key, choosing the rat. The sickening collapse of the transformation was over in a second. As 2 men in dark work coveralls and heavy boots stepped into the apartment, I was already scurrying into the kitchen. They moved with professional silence, pulling on gloves, their eyes scanning the room. They weren't the blurry shadows. These were human enforcers, the society's muscle. One of them pulled out a canvas bag, clearly intending to collect the journal and any other research. From my hiding spot behind the stove, I darted toward a mess of power cords under Sarah's desk. My rat teeth were like tiny, razor-sharp chisels. I bit down on the thick black cable of a power strip. There was a bright flash of blue sparks, a loud pop, and the entire apartment plunged into darkness. One of the men swore. The other fumbled for a flashlight. That was the opening we needed. "Now, Sarah, go!" I mentally screamed, even though she couldn't hear me. But she understood. In the confusion, I heard the bedroom window slide open, the soft thud of her feet landing on the fire escape. I followed, a tiny gray shadow slipping out into the night. We didn't stop running until we were 6 blocks away, huddled in the doorway of a closed laundromat, hearts pounding. Her sanctuary was gone, compromised. We found a cheap, anonymous motel near the expressway, paying in cash. The room smelled of stale smoke and bleach. It was there, under the flickering fluorescent lights, that Sarah made the final terrifying breakthrough in the journal. "I've figured it out," she whispered, her face grim. "The dissolution. It's not just about opening a door." She explained that the Penumbra Society didn't see the shadows as invaders. but as liberators from the chaos of life. Their goal wasn't destruction, but a twisted kind of salvation. The ritual, powered by the citywide network of geomagnetically active sites, wasn't meant to just punch a hole in reality. It was designed to use the city's own energy, the electrical grid, the raw psychic imprint of millions of people, as an anchor. They were going to pull the shadow reality into ours, merging them, overriding the laws of physics and biology with the cold, silent, eternal principles of the void. It was the end of everything: color, sound, warmth, life. And the journal gave us a time and place. The final ritual had to be performed during a total lunar eclipse, a time when the boundaries between worlds were naturally thin. It would take place at the highest point in the city, a place closest to the heavens. The Ether Tower, a new super-tall skyscraper still under construction downtown, a skeletal finger of steel and glass piercing the clouds. The next eclipse was in 3 days. That night, my dreams were not my own. I wasn't in the motel room anymore. I was falling into the portal from my nightmares. I saw the shadow world, the stillness firsthand. It was a place of absolute, soul-crushing horror. There was no up or down, no light or dark in the conventional sense. Just an infinite, silent expanse of what looked like black, crystalline ice, fractured by impossible geometric shapes that twisted the mind and made the eyes water. In the distance, things moved. Vast, formless entities drifted through the void, things made of pure hunger and entropy. They weren't alive. They were the opposite of life. And they were thirsty. I woke with a choked gasp, drenched in sweat, the sterile motel room seeming like the most beautiful paradise I had ever seen. The stakes had been raised to an impossible height. This was no longer about surviving. It was about preventing the entire world from being plunged into a silent, frozen hell. Driven by a new, desperate urgency, we decided to investigate one of the Society's properties, an old, abandoned pumping station near the lakefront that Sarah had identified as a key node in their network. We broke in under the cover of darkness. The place was cavernous and cold, smelling of rust and stagnant water. In the center of the main floor, the concrete had been torn up. A complex series of symbols, the same interlocking crescents from the journal, had been carved into the ground and inlaid with some dark, non-reflective metal. As I stepped closer, the air grew frigid. The carvings seemed to writhe in my peripheral vision, to squirm like living things. A low hum vibrated up through the soles of my shoes, a subsonic frequency that made my teeth ache. The wolf inside me, the primal part of my spirit now fused to my own, began to howl in terror. It recognized this energy. It was wrong. It was the touch of the stillness, a small taste of the abyss they were trying to unleash. We had seen the enemy's plan. We had seen his face. And now, standing in this cold, desecrated place, we had felt the touch of the unmaking they so eagerly worshipped. There were only 3 days left until the end of the world. There was no one to call. The Chicago PD would laugh us out of the station if they didn't commit us first. The FBI? How do you report a conspiracy led by one of the city's most beloved philanthropists to end reality as we know it? We were alone. A disgraced academic and a haunted ex-courier against a 100-year-old death cult with infinite resources. The odds weren't just long, they were non-existent. Our new base of operations was the back of a stolen plumbing van we'd hot-wired and parked in a multi-story garage downtown. It was anonymous, mobile, and smelled faintly of grease and copper piping. Inside, Sarah had her laptop propped on a stack of phone books, her face illuminated by the screen. She had managed to use a university proxy server to get back into their system. "I've got them," she announced, a hint of triumph in her voice. "The architectural plans for the Ether Tower." On the screen, a complex 3D model of the unfinished skyscraper rotated slowly. For hours we studied it, memorizing every detail. Ventilation shafts big enough to fly through. Service elevators that bypassed main security. Unfinished floors that were just concrete slabs and exposed rebar. We were looking for a way in, a path to the top that avoided the army of private security that Davenport would undoubtedly have in place. While Sarah mapped out the battlefield, I prepared the weapon. Myself. I pushed my body to its absolute limit. In the cavernous, empty levels of the parking garage at 3 a.m., I practiced. I forced the transformations over and over, trying to shorten the agonizing transition time. The shifts left me breathless, my muscles screaming in protest, a profound, soul-deep weariness settling into my bones. I was burning through my own life force, and I could feel it. A tremor had started in my hands that didn't go away. I learned to combine the forms. Shift to the rat, slip under a door, then immediately into the falcon to get a view from above. Shift back to human, then into the wolf, ready for a fight. It was a brutal, exhausting dance, and every performance carved a little more away from Leo Holloway. Meanwhile, the city itself seemed to be getting sick. The Penumbra Society was ramping up its preparatory rituals. A strange energy was bleeding into Chicago. The news reported scattered power outages that technicians couldn't explain. There was a story about a train operator on the Blue Line who stopped his train in the tunnel and refused to move, babbling about how the darkness between stations was too loud. People went missing. Not many, just a few at a time, mostly transients and lost souls no one would miss. The city was developing a fever, and we were the only two people who knew the disease. We knew we couldn't just wait for the eclipse. We had to disrupt their preparations, throw a wrench in the gears. From the journal, Sarah identified a key component for the final ritual. A series of obsidian mirrors, artifacts from the original 1893 cult, which were needed to focus the eclipse's energy. The journal mentioned they were being moved from a secure vault to the tower 2 nights before the main event. "This is our only shot to weaken them before the final fight," Sarah said, her eyes grim. That night, I became the hunter. Dressed in dark clothes, I waited in the rafters of an old industrial warehouse in the South Side, the location Sarah had pinpointed for the transfer. The wolf form was a familiar agony now, a burning cloak I pulled on. Through its eyes, I watched as an armored van pulled into the loading bay, followed by a black sedan carrying 4 of Davenport's human enforcers. They were professionals, moving with tactical precision as they began to unload a series of heavy, lead-lined crates. I didn't give them time to set up. I dropped from the rafters, a 90-pound blur of gray fur and fury. The first man went down with a scream, my jaws closing on his shoulder. The second fired his pistol wildly, the shots echoing like thunder in the cavernous space. The bullet grazed my flank, a line of fire across my ribs, but I barely felt it. I was on him in a heartbeat, a whirlwind of claws and teeth. The fight was savage and quick. They were trained men, but they were prepared for another man, not a creature of primal rage. I moved faster than they could track, a ghost in the dim light. I shattered kneecaps, tore through arms, disabled and neutralized. I didn't kill them, but I broke them, leaving them moaning and bleeding on the concrete floor. With the guards down, I turned on the crates. My claws splintered the wood. Inside, resting on beds of black foam, were the mirrors. They were discs of volcanic glass so black they seemed to drink the light, and they radiated the same bone-chilling cold I'd felt at the pumping station. I smashed them. One by one, I shattered them with my paws, ground the shards into dust under my claws, until nothing was left but glittering black powder on the floor. I limped out of the warehouse as sirens wailed in the distance. The transformation back to human was the worst it had ever been. The pain was magnified by the bullet wound in my side. I collapsed in the back of the van, naked and bleeding as Sarah sped away. She had to stitch the wound herself, using a first aid kit and a bottle of cheap whiskey for antiseptic. Her hands were surprisingly steady as she worked, her brow furrowed in concentration. The needle bit into my skin again and again. In that moment of shared pain and fierce focus, huddled in the back of our stolen van, our strange partnership was sealed in blood. We weren't just an alliance of convenience anymore. We were all each other had. "That will slow them down," she said, tying off the last stitch. "But it won't stop them. Davenport will find a substitute, or engineer a new focusing lens. All we did was buy ourselves a little time." "It's all we need," I gasped, the whiskey and the pain making the world swim. "We know where he'll be, and we know when. One night remained, one final ascent, one chance to stop the coming silence." The night of the eclipse descended on Chicago like a shroud. A strange, coppery twilight painted the sky as the moon began to slide across the sun's reflection. The city lights seemed to flicker, their glow muted and uncertain. A profound quiet settled over the streets, as if the whole city was holding its breath. From the back of our van, parked a block away, the ether tower clawed at the bruised sky, its top lost in the low-hanging clouds, its skeletal crane a silent sentinel. Davenport's security was even heavier than we'd anticipated. Black SUVs were parked at every entrance, and grim-faced men in sharp suits patrolled the perimeter. There was no way to walk in. "Okay, Leo, it's time." Sarah's voice crackled in my earpiece. She was our eye in the sky, our guide, hunched over her laptop in the van. "The storm drain cover on the east side. That will get you into the sub-basement. I'll guide you from there." Phase 1. Infiltration. I slipped into a dark alley, the cold air raising goosebumps on my skin. The transformation into the rat was a familiar, disgusting ordeal. The world exploded into a giant's landscape. I squeezed through the grate of the storm drain and dropped into the echoing darkness below. The tunnel was a river of filth and grime, but I followed Sarah's directions, her voice a tinny guide through the maze. Left at the next junction, follow the wide conduit pipe upward. I emerged through a drain pipe into the tower's cavernous sub-basement. It was a concrete tomb filled with massive generators and water pumps. Guided by Sarah, I navigated the labyrinth, a tiny, unseen spy in the belly of the beast. "I'm at the central service shaft," I whispered into the tiny microphone taped to my cheek after reversing the transformation in a dark corner. I was human again for now. "Good," Sarah replied. "It goes all the way to the top, but they'll have motion sensors. You can't climb it." "I'm not going to climb." Phase 2. Flight. I took a deep breath and triggered the key. The feeling of release as I became the falcon was a welcome relief from the rat's crawling horror and the wolf's burning rage. My wings caught the air and I soared upwards into the massive, unfinished atrium that formed the tower's core. Floor after floor of raw concrete and steel scaffolding rushed past. It was a breathtaking and terrifying sight. The entire city was visible through the painless floor-to-ceiling windows, bathed in the eerie, blood-red light of the eclipse. The moon, Now a dark disk, haloed in fire, hung directly overhead. "Leo, I'm seeing movement," Sarah's voice cut in, laced with tension. "Upper technical floors. They're not just guards. They're different." I saw them as I neared the 80th floor. Acolytes, members of the inner circle. They stood guard on a maintenance catwalk, and even from a distance, I could feel the coldness coming off them. These weren't just thugs. They were true believers, granted a sliver of their master's power. They moved with a predatory grace, their eyes scanning the darkness with unnatural acuity. I landed silently on a steel girder 100 feet below them. There was no flying past this. Phase 3. Battle. I let the falcon dissolve, the key shifting in my hand. The agony of the wolf transformation tore through me, but I bit back the scream, channeling the pain into fury. I was the guardian. This was my purpose. I charged up the service stairs, a gray shadow of muscle and instinct. The first acolyte turned just as I burst onto the catwalk. He was faster than any normal human. He swung a heavy wrench, but I was faster. I ducked under the blow, my claws tearing through his leg. He screamed, a sound of surprise as much as pain. The other two converged on me. This was not like the fight at the warehouse. They were strong, and their movements were infused with the cold, jarring energy of the stillness. One of them landed a kick that sent me skidding across the concrete, my ribs screaming in protest. They fought with a fanatic zeal, ignoring their own injuries. It was a desperate, brutal brawl on a half-finished floor, surrounded by a 1,000-foot drop. The wind howled through the empty window frames, a mournful chorus to our fight. I was wounded, exhausted, burning through the very last of my reserves, but I was driven by a single, unwavering purpose. I had to get to the roof. While I fought for my life, Sarah was fighting her own battle. "Got it!" she yelled through the earpiece. "I'm in their system. Time for a little distraction." Suddenly, alarms blared to life on the floors far below us. Emergency lights began to flash. "I've triggered a fire alarm in the lower lobby and locked out the main elevators," she explained. "That should draw most of the ground-level security away. It's the best I can do." It was enough. The distraction, however brief, caused the acolytes to hesitate. In that moment of uncertainty, I struck. I lunged, a final desperate attack that sent the last two fanatics tumbling into a pile of construction debris. They weren't dead, but they weren't getting up anytime soon. Bleeding from a dozen cuts, my body a mass of bruises, I hauled myself up the final ladder. I pushed open the heavy steel trapdoor and emerged onto the roof of the ether tower, and into the heart of the storm. The roof of the world was a wind-blasted landscape of concrete and exposed steel. The eclipse was at its peak. The bloody corona of the sun framed a perfect circle of blackness in the sky, casting the city in a light that felt ancient and wrong. Dozens of cultists in dark, hooded robes stood in a wide circle, their arms raised to the darkened sun. Their voices joined in a low, monotonous chant, a guttural language that seemed to scrape at the air, making the steel under my paws vibrate. In the center of the circle stood an altar, not of stone, but a complex array of the new obsidian mirrors, salvaged or replaced, all angled inward. They were focused on a single point in the air above them. And it was working. The space above the altar was tearing. It started as a shimmer like heat haze, then darkened into a line, a crack in the sky. It widened, deepened, becoming a roiling, unstable vortex of absolute blackness, a wound in the very fabric of reality. A freezing cold, a physical manifestation of the stillness I had seen in my nightmares, poured from the rift, washing over the rooftop and extinguishing all warmth. I didn't hesitate. I let out a savage howl that cut through their chanting and charged. As a wolf, I was a force of pure primal chaos. I crashed into their circle, scattering the robed figures like bowling pins. I leapt onto the altar and with a sweep of my powerful forelegs, sent 2 of the obsidian mirrors skittering across the concrete, shattering against a pile of rebar. The portal wavered, the chanting faltering. From the center of the chaos, Julian Davenport turned to face me. He wasn't wearing a robe, but a perfectly tailored suit. There was no fear on his face, only a rapturous, insane smile. "The Guardian," he said, his voice calm and clear over the wind. "You are too late. The cycle Abernathy failed to protect is finally complete. The dissolution is here." He didn't try to fight me. He didn't run. Instead, he spread his arms wide, turning his face up toward the screaming black rift in the sky. "I offer myself," he shouted. "Become whole in this vessel. Let us be one." A tendril of living darkness, thick as a python, lashed out from the portal. It struck Davenport in the chest. He didn't cry out. His body went rigid, his eyes rolled back in his head, and he began to change. It was a biological horror show. His bones snapped and reshaped under his skin. His expensive suit tore as his torso swelled and elongated. His flesh turned a slick, oily black, flowing and bubbling like hot tar. Tendrils of shadow erupted from his back, lashing the air. His head split open, and a cluster of cold blue eyes, like the hearts of the shadows I'd killed, bloomed on his face. The human that was Julian Davenport was gone, consumed, replaced by a monstrous avatar of the void, a physical extension of the alien horror from beyond. This was their champion. It lunged at me, no longer a man, but a 10-foot-tall horror of writhing tentacles and alien malice. The final battle began. I was fast and strong, my fangs and claws the only things in this world that seemed capable of harming its otherworldly flesh. I tore at its shifting form, ripping away chunks of solidified shadow, but the wounds sealed themselves almost instantly, healed by the raw energy pouring from the portal. It struck back with blows of pure force that felt like being hit by a car. One of its tentacles wrapped around my leg and threw me across the rooftop. I slammed into a steel support beam, and the world exploded in a flash of white-hot pain. My vision swam. The monster glided toward me, its many cold eyes fixed on my broken form. I was going to die. I couldn't beat it. It was a piece of a god, and I was just a man in a borrowed wolf's skin. Lying in the dust and debris, my ribs shattered, I saw past the monster. I saw the portal. It was growing, stabilized now, pulsing in time with the avatar's movements. The creature wasn't just a monster. It was an anchor, a conduit. As long as the portal was open, it was immortal. The chilling realization hit me. I couldn't win by fighting the avatar. It wasn't the real enemy. It was just a symptom. The disease was the rift itself. I had to close the door. My gaze fell to my foreleg, to the bronze watch still strapped there, its strange face seeming to pulse with a faint inner light. The bestiary key. A key. It opened the door to the beast within me. But Abernathy's journal, in a passage Sarah had struggled to translate, had said more. That which is opened by the key may also be sealed by it. The lock and the key are one, born of the same balance. It was a lockpick, but it was also a deadbolt. A final, desperate plan bloomed in my mind, born of agony and instinct. It was a one-way trip, a final gamble with the universe. Ignoring the regenerating nightmare that was lumbering toward me, I used my last ounce of strength to push myself to my feet. My body screamed in protest. With a guttural roar that was part pain and part defiance, I launched myself in a final, desperate sprint, not at the monster, but past it, toward the heart of the ritual, toward the portal itself. The avatar of Davenport swiped at me, a tentacle of pure void catching my side, tearing flesh and breaking bone, but my momentum carried me forward. I was running on pure will. I reached the epicenter, the unstable, shrieking vortex of cold and nothingness. I could feel it pulling at me, trying to unmake me, to dissolve my very atoms into the stillness. With my good arm, I tore the bestiary key from my leg. The bronze was searingly cold, vibrating with a terrible, resonant energy as it came close to the rift. It was fighting the portal, or the portal was fighting it. Two opposite poles forced together. "Close it!" I screamed, to the world, to myself, to whatever powers of balance might still exist. With a final, defiant roar, I threw the watch. It didn't just fly into the portal. It was seized by it, yanked into the heart of the unnatural tear in reality with incredible force. For one silent, eternal moment, nothing happened. Then the ancient artifact, overloaded with the raw, alien energy of the shadow world, did what it was designed to do. It balanced the equation with a bang. The explosion was not of darkness, but of pure, blinding, golden light. It erupted from the portal, a silent, expanding sphere of clean, warm energy. This light was the antithesis of the stillness. It was the light of life, of creation, of a sun rising on the first day. It was beautiful and utterly lethal to the creatures of shadow. The portal shrieked, a sound that tore at the soul and began to collapse in on itself. The golden light was a cauterizing fire, sealing the wound in the world. The Davenport thing, caught in the blast, dissolved. It didn't burn or bleed. It simply unraveled, its form and substance erased by the pure, cleansing energy. The robed cultists screamed as the light washed over them, their bodies turning to dust and scattering on the wind, their connection to their dark masters severed and incinerated. The shock wave hit me like a physical blow. It picked me up and threw me through the air. I remember a brief, detached sensation of flying, the beautiful, terrible light filling my vision, and then a final, crushing impact against a stack of steel girders. And then, darkness. My own this time. I woke to the gentle warmth of the sun on my face. The sky above was a brilliant clear blue. The eclipse was over. A new day had begun. I was lying on the rooftop, my body a single throbbing universe of pain, but I was human. The watch was gone. The power was gone. I could feel its absence like a phantom limb. I was just Leo Holloway again, a broken, bleeding, but wholly human courier. It took me hours to painfully crawl and stumble my way down from the tower and melt back into the city. No one stopped me. In the chaos of the false fire alarm and the strange power surges, I was just another piece of debris. The news that day mentioned a minor tremor and a freak atmospheric phenomenon over the loop during the eclipse, attributed to solar flares. Julian Davenport was reported missing, presumed to be the victim of a tragic accident. The Penumbra Society had vanished back into the woodwork, their leadership decapitated, their plan shattered. The city went on. People rushed to work, cabs honked, the L train rumbled on its tracks. No one knew how close they had come to utter annihilation. No one knew what had transpired on that rooftop under a bleeding sky. No one but me. I still ride the streets of Chicago, but I ride differently now. I see the city in a way no one else does. I see the shadows that linger in the alleys and I watch them, I know the monsters are still out there waiting, patient. They lost the war, but the darkness is never truly gone. My watch is over. But my vigil has just begun.